Hello, and welcome back to the 21 Days to Wonders coaching. My name is Zen from Zen Mindset, and just in case you don't remember, I'm a resilience and mindset coach. I trust that you had a great first week and that you've begun to put some of those mindfulness lessons into practice. Remember, we're just doing a little bit at a time. We're not trying to eat the whole elephant in one bite. We're just trying to build the habit for now so that it's easier to integrate into our lives. So if you haven't made as much progress as you expecting to make, that's absolutely fine. You can be mindful of that and then just start to incorporate it into your day. Remember, we're just looking at 2 minutes twice a day. That's all. Don't try and go for more at first. Just build that habit and then you can increase the time over time. So today we'll be looking at self-talk, specifically how to overcome negative self-talk and to start thinking more positively. All you need for this session is a pen and a sheet of paper because there'll be quite a bit of writing. So if you don't have anything close to you, I just suggest you pause the video for a second and grab a notebook or something because there'll be a bit of writing, nothing too hectic. So with that having been said, let's jump right in. So really quickly, let's look at the benefits of positive thinking. Why should we even bother with positive thinking? Well, first thing is that it lowers stress, and well, that's never a bad thing as far as I can tell. It gives us better coping skills during challenging times because whenever we're facing a challenge, we can look at that challenge negatively and then we disengage with that challenge. We step away rather than stepping into it. Whereas with a more positive attitude, with more positive thinking, we can engage with that challenge more better. It gives us more resilience. Gives us better physical and mental well-being. So things like anxiety, things like depression, things like any kind of mental issues that we're dealing with, having a positive attitude, having optimism has been proven through studies that it actually does result in better overall health, both physically and mentally. It also gives you better immunity, tying into the previous point. So you're not less prone to things like colds and flus. You do know that when people have high levels of stress, they also tend to get ill more easily. So having more optimism helps you to counter all of those things. And finally, helps us to build better relationships because let's face it, no one wants to spend time with a person that is negative and down all the time. People do tend to want to spend more time with people who make them feel better, people who are upbeat, people who are positive. And that's not to say that you have to become this clown that's just always cracking jokes and always positive. It just means that the general tendency is that you are more optimistic than negative. It doesn't mean that you're a perfect human being. So what is negative thinking? Put simply, it's when you do any of these three things. It's when you take a situation and the situation is relatively neutral. Something has happened. It's neutral. It's neither good nor bad, but we view that neutral situation as bad. You remember in maths, when you're told you can either round something up or you can round something down. With positive thinking, we're rounding down all the time. We're not rounding things up. So you're taking things that are neutral and making them bad. And you're taking bad situations, things that are clearly not ideal, but because of how you're viewing it, you're moving this thing from bad to worse. So it's a bad situation, now it's a worse situation. You're making something bad into a disaster, into a catastrophe, when maybe it's not that. And finally, it's when you take good situations and you make something good neutral, or you even make it bad. So something good happens in your day and you talk yourself down out of that. Maybe someone complimented you or something small happened. It might not even be anything big. You saw a beautiful sunset, or you had a very interesting conversation with a stranger in the queue for half a minute. And you say, well, maybe they're just feeling sorry for me, or I never see the sunset, so it doesn't really matter. We take those little things and we wipe them out. So that's generally the essence of negative thinking, is taking situations that are sometimes neutral or bad and making them worse, or taking things that are good and making them bad, or just writing them off, or discounting the positives. And where does it come from? Typically, it can be the result of negative criticism when we're growing up. So maybe at teachers or parents or friends around us who talked down or made fun of us or something. And as we grow up, we keep that same thinking pattern. We keep running that conditioning in our heads. We take over the negative thinking for ourselves. We start to criticize ourselves. We start to think negatively about situations. Even though these people aren't around us anymore, we've taken over because that pattern has really been ingrained within us. And sometimes it can happen as a result of a series of negative events in your life, a series of bad events. So maybe, sometimes you go through really stressful times, really hard times, and we can either come out of those things stronger, or we can assign a bad label to those things and say, or maybe God or the universe or life has it in for me. This is the saying that bad things, the bad things, the brown stuff, it tends to come in batches. It doesn't just come at once, right? And when it gets distributed, it's never really even when it hits the fan. So it's the same thing. We have a series of bad situations, one after the other. Then we start to think negatively, and we assume that the future is going to be the same as the past just because of these things. It's a way of trying to keep ourselves safe and not have really high expectations for ourselves, because we know that if you have a high expectation for your life or set lofty goals, then something bad is going to happen and you're setting yourself up for failure. So negative thinking is like, okay, if I don't think positively, then I can't be disappointed. But really, you're selling yourself short. It's better to have highs and lows than to just have lows, even if they are relatively mild lows all the time. So that is the essence of negative thinking. Now, in terms of negative thinking patterns, they come in different flavors. There's about a dozen of them, but these are the 4 most common types of thinking patterns. So let's look at these different types of thinking patterns, and let's see if you can identify your flavor. What's the flavor of choice? Your flavor of choice. Do you prefer chocolate or ice cream or vanilla when it comes to negative thinking? Not to say that it tastes that good, because it doesn't. So the first one is mind reading. And with mind reading, you're assuming you know what other people are thinking specifically about you. So someone looks bored, maybe you're giving a speech or doing some kind of presentation, and then you automatically assume they must not think that I'm interesting. Well, maybe that person had a long night the night before, or there's something else in their mind that's got nothing to do with you, but we're assuming that it's something to do with us. Or you see someone in the morning, she didn't greet me, she must be upset with me. We automatically assume that something negative has happened just because of one event. I'm running late, everyone is going to think I'm unprofessional just because of one time or a couple of times that you've happened to run late, because guess what? You're a human being, right? So mind reading, we assume we're projecting our own thoughts into other people's thoughts and assuming that's what they are thinking, when that's not the case at all. You don't know what another person is thinking. The second type of negative thinking pattern is generalizing. So generalizing, it's when you make a broad assumption, a broad conclusion based on one insignificant event. So something small happens and then we assume that that's how things always are. She's a better person than me because she's always smiling. Can a person always be smiling even when you're not around? How can you know that for a fact? But we're just painting everything with the same color. My parents were overweight, which means I'll always be overweight too. My parents are overweight, that's them. How can you assume that just because what they did and the lifestyle that they lived, that's the same thing that's going to be happening to you? You've got your own lifestyle, you've got your own decisions, your own choice, your own dreams and goals, which means that your life can be different from theirs. So just because one thing has happened doesn't mean that all these other things are going to happen. That's when we generalize. With catastrophizing, it's assumed that an event is going to be not bad, but disastrous. If I mess this up, I'll never get another chance, ever again. That means that everything rests on your perfect performance on this one thing. And do you think that's going to help your performance, or that's going to hinder it when you go in with this kind of attitude? My husband or wife is late for dinner. He or she must be having an affair. Well, maybe their phone is off because the battery died, or they were in a relatively minor car accident, or the tire went flat or something. Who knows, right? But you're just taking one situation and making it the worst possible outcome, right? I made a mistake at work. My career is ruined and I'll be homeless, right? When you place this much pressure on our shoulders, it is not a good thing at all. We're taking things that are neutral or bad and making them far much more worse than they should be. And that makes it very hard to deal with that situation. And then you've got black and white thinking. This one is when you're exclusively seeing situations in extreme categories with no shades of gray in between. Because let's face it, life is really that black or white. There's always shades of gray. Nothing's neither good or bad. No one's either perfectly good person or perfectly bad person. If you look at yourself and you ask yourself, am I a perfectly good person or am I a perfectly bad person? You won't say you're perfectly good, but would you say that you're a scoundrel, the bottom of the barrel criminal type of person? You're not either, right? You lie somewhere in between, and it's the same thing with life. Life is neither 100% good or 100% bad. It varies, and situations vary. So black and white thinking, another way of thinking of that is called all or nothing thinking. It's either all perfect or it's all bad. Everything is now ruined. Everything in your life. Because of one thing that's happened, everything is now ruined. How possible is that? Your life is in different categories. It's possible to have one bad thing happen in one area and it not affect other areas of your life, unless you choose to let it affect those areas of your life. Nothing ever goes right for me. Nothing ever goes right for you. I mean, how many things go right for us every day that we've just overlooked? The sun came up, whoa, you didn't have to do anything with that. Like, fair enough, you might not have a say in whether or not the sun rises, but thank God it does, right? You're breathing clean air right now. Hopefully you've gotten a meal. I mean, that's not to say that just because the sun rose and you've had a meal and you can breathe clean oxygen that life is automatically perfect. Fair enough, but does that mean that life is always bad as well? There's shades of gray. So things might be bad, but they might not be as bad as we think they are. And that's what we're looking at here. We're looking at trying to limit those extremes. So we've got catastrophizing, black and white thinking, mind reading, and generalizing. Which of those would you say you tend to lean towards in your day-to-day life? And that's not to say that you use it all the time, but which one do you find yourself using more often than not in terms of thinking negatively, if you do think negatively, which everybody, once again, does, because no one is 100% perfect, right? Even I am prone to these thinking patterns, but it's about catching them and overcoming them. So you can take a minute right now to pause the video and just look at the statements that have been written there and think to yourself, which of these do I most resonate with? Great. Now here's some warning words to let you know that you're thinking, you're deviating down that negative thinking pattern, you're moving down that road. So these are the kinds of words that people often use when they're thinking negatively. So words like always, never, worthless, impossible, perfect, useless, must, I must do this thing, disaster, and waste. It's a complete waste of time. I should never have done that thing. When you see these kinds of words popping up quite frequently in your language, especially when they're tied to negative statements, it might be a sign that you're thinking in one of those negative thinking patterns that I mentioned before. So how can we stop the process, hijack the process, and move down a different path when it comes to positive thinking? First thing you can do is just to be mindful. We spoke about this in the last session, right? What is mindfulness? It's when you're just observing your thoughts, you're observing your experience, but you're not judging it as being good or bad. So you observe your thoughts whenever you have a negative thought, but don't judge it as good or bad, just observe it and notice it without attaching yourself to it and say it is a thought, but it is not me. It does not define me as a person, right? It's just a thought. And what happens then is that it allows you to respond to the situation rather than react to it, to react out of emotion. Because remember, we say between an event and our response, there's always that gap. And when we're mindful, it allows us to grow that gap so that we're more conscious of our thoughts, we're more conscious of our decisions and our behavior and our language. So the more we practice mindfulness, it allows you to just stop it and observe things and just say, hey, okay, I thought about that, but is that really true? Do I have to, just because I thought a thought, does that mean I have to believe that thought? And can I just observe that thought without even judging it, without trying to run away from it or detach from it? Just notice it and sit with it. And the more you do this, the bigger that gap grows and allows you to have more options. It allows you to respond in a more calm, in a more conscious, in a more rational manner, no matter what it is that you're dealing with. So that is tip number 1, be mindful. And you can watch the previous video, the previous coaching video, if you want to learn more about mindfulness. The second thing you want to do is identify your self-talk. So how you describe a situation, how you describe an experience you have ends up becoming how you experience it. If you go into a situation or you've experienced something and you give that thing a negative label, even if it was a neutral thing or a bad thing, you can take that thing from being bad to far much more worse, or you can take something that's neutral and make it far much more positive just by the type of language that you choose to use. So it would then stand that if you change your habitual vocabulary, you literally change your life. You change your emotional and your thinking life just through the power of language. Because think about this, if you don't have a word to describe it, you make it very hard to experience. There's a study that was done on prisoners some years back, and they were looking at their vocabulary, but specifically their emotional vocabulary, not just the vocabulary in terms of how well read were they, how literate they were. And they found that most people that were in there for violent offenses, didn't have a rich emotional vocabulary. So what they found is that typically people who were, when they looked at the list of the average professional, average person that was not in prison and the person that was in prison for that specific type of offense, the people that went in prison have more ways of describing their emotions versus a person that has very few ways who's in prison. So a person will experience a bad situation and they tell themselves in their heads, maybe consciously or subconsciously or consciously, that they are angry. So something bad happens and I'm angry. Now imagine if anger and fear are literally the only 2 words you have to describe how you feel. That means that I might be feeling a well of emotions, but if I automatically say this well, this mixture of emotions, this soup of emotions is anger, then it becomes anger because you've put that label on it. There's so many other things you could use other than anger. You could be feeling discomfort, you could be feeling concern, you can be feeling worried, right? You might be feeling annoyed, you might be feeling irritated. There are so many ways of describing those words, but if all you have is angry, then that's what you feel. And that's what you find with a lot of people. It's like they're very quick to feel these emotions because they're comfortable with it, number one. But because the second reason is they've got very limited ways of describing the emotions. So anything bad happens, anything happens that annoys them, it's automatically anger for them or feeling sorry for themselves or it could be worry or fear and anxiety because they don't have many ways of describing those emotions. And the more ways you have to describe emotions, the more emotions you have that you can feel. You've given yourself more options. There's a tribe in North America, I think it's the Inuit, the Eskimos, and they don't have a word for war. And as a result, they've actually never been at war with all the different tribes that are out there, the different sub-tribes that they have. They've actually never, warfare is not something that exists in their language and they've never experienced it. Now, we might say they never experienced it because they haven't experienced it, therefore they don't have the word. But either way you look at it, they don't have a way to experience it. And as such, when all these settlers were there and you're trying to describe warfare to them, they just couldn't register. Like, why would you want to fight another person? Because it's not in their vocabulary at all. There's another tribe, I think it's in the Philippines, they don't have a word for hate. The word hate just does not exist in their vocabulary. And as such, these guys are amongst the most loving, the most friendly people that you could ever come across. So if you don't have a way to describe it, you make it difficult to experience. And what I want to do is give you a highway. I want to give you a highway to happiness that you can just easily get onto at any time. And I want to give you the crappiest, worst dirt road with potholes and broken trees towards negative feelings. That's what we want to do within ourselves. We want to make it so hard to describe negative feelings without running away from them. You can be mindful of them, but you don't attach yourselves to them. We want to also diminish those feelings, right? So you want a dirt road to feeling like crap, and you want a highway to happiness. So after you've identified your self-talk, how is it that you habitually talk to yourself? What kind of phrases do you find yourself using most often? You can just pause the video for a second and write that down. What kind of phrases do you find yourself using when you think negatively? So you've woken up in the morning, you've got a bunch of things that you have to do, and you find that the fridge for some odd reason got unplugged last night, or maybe there was load shedding and stuff is now defrosting and there's a puddle of water on the floor, or the car's got a flat tire, or the battery won't work, or the cat or the dog has left a mess somewhere. You know, all those little things that add up. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when this happens? Now, this is not about being right or wrong. We're just trying to get a snapshot of the language that you use so that we can start to change it. So what kind of words do you use to describe situations? Just think of 2 or 3 for now. Pause the video and just write those down. Great. So what I want you to do now is look at negative words, specific, not phrases, but specific negative words that you use habitually. And you're going to write 3 down, right? And you're going to find 3 empowering alternatives for them. So you're going to take a negative word, one that's very intense, one that's loaded with lots of negativity, and we're going to lower that emotional intensity. So rather than saying, if you feel anger all the time, rather than saying, I feel angry, you're going to use words like annoyed or irritated. And annoyed or irritated, I'm sure you'd agree, has a far much more lower emotional threshold, emotional intensity than the word angry. So what you're going to do is you're going to replace that word. If that's the word you use most often, you're going to replace anger with annoyed or irritated. And you find that next time you feel angry, you don't use the word angry, say, I feel so annoyed. And even just saying it, it'll crack you up and it's going to break that pattern and lower the emotional threshold. And even people around you, like, you're annoyed. You're not angry. You're like, no, I'm not angry, I'm annoyed. You doing so is actually going to change the situation. It's going to change your experience of the situation. So here's some examples I've given you, but you feel free to think up some of your own and replace those words that you habitually use. So rather than say I failed at this thing, you can say I learned something, I'm learning, I'm in the process of learning. I was rejected by this person, or I feel so rejected. You could say I was misunderstood in that situation. I feel anxious, you could change that for I feel uncomfortable. I feel worried about this thing. Oh, I'm worried about my taxes and all these things. You can change that around, and I am concerned about the situation. Or what you've done there is you've lowered that emotional intensity. Does that mean that you're sweeping issues under the carpet? No, you're making them more easy for you to deal with because it's not this big thing anymore. And you're giving yourself more emotional flexibility. Are there times when it's good to be angry? Yes. But you don't want that to be your default pattern every time and at all times in all situations. Now I'm going to do the same for positive words. Write 3 words that you habitually use to describe positive emotions, and then create 3 empowering alternatives to magnify them. So here, there's a lot of words that they're not bad, they're actually good words, but they just lack emotional intensity. And sometimes really great things happen in our lives, really great things happen in our day, but because of the way we describe those things, it actually lowers the emotional intensity of those things when they could have been really great. So a word that's used most very commonly is good. How's your day? It was good. How's the meeting? It was a good meeting. What if you change that? And you notice here, I gave you more options than in the negative one, because I want to give you a highway to happiness, as I said. We use words like amazing, outstanding. It was an outstanding meeting. I feel amazing today. And by you using those words, you're increasing the emotional intensity and you feel different when you use more alive words. Nice, nice as a cup of tea, right? How's meal? It was nice. How about incredible or great? I swear, yes, when you use these kind of words, people will open their eyes and might stare at you like, great, was it really that great? You know, because you're so used to that pattern. They're not trying to bring you down. It's just this thing called cognitive dissonance, where you've got a change here and you've got how things have always been. And the two sort of not clash, but it's a change. and it takes a while for the one to overpower the other one. So stick with it. I promise you, people will be using that same language around you, and it becomes this feedback thing where you're using that word, using those words rather than the weak words. Happy. How about fantastic or fired up? Okay, phenomenal or perfect. Like, passionate, and love. I love this movie. I feel fired up. I feel great today. I feel amazing. Use these words to amplify your positive words, and you will notice a difference in your thoughts and in your attitude and mood. Now, the final thing that you can do is challenge negative thinking. This one's so important. Negative thinking is like a tenant. It's like having someone renting from you. It's a thought that's living in your head, but it's rent-free. It's eating your food. It's using up electricity, your gas. It's leaving a mess all over the place. Why would you want to keep it in there? You want to challenge any type of negative thought that you have. No matter how big or small it is, do not let it slide, because you want to kill the monster when it's still small, not when it's eating the city, right? So ask yourself whether the thoughts that you have are realistic or they're biased whenever you have a negative thought. Whenever you challenge negative thoughts, it disempowers them and pushes them out of your mind altogether. So a thought might be something like, I'm not good enough. Challenge it. Say, how's that true? How am I not good enough? No, I'm doing my best in very difficult circumstances, right? Nobody likes me. Maybe Tanya doesn't like me. You're being very specific here, and you're saying maybe. You're not saying for sure that Tanya doesn't like you. Maybe she does, maybe she doesn't. That's why you said maybe. And you're being very specific with a person. You're not saying nobody. You're not saying everybody in the whole world, 6+ billion people don't like you, who don't even know you. Be specific. Maybe Tanya doesn't like me, and you can deal with that, because maybe Tanya is a douchebag. Who knows? I'm just joking. My whole life is terrible. You haven't lived your whole life yet, so you can't really say it is, right? And I'm sure, as I said, nothing is black or white. They're always shades of gray. So maybe it's not that your whole life is terrible. Maybe you just had a bad day. More specifically, maybe one bad thing happened in the day, and then you said you had a bad day. Maybe your day was actually okay. Or not okay. Maybe you had a great day. I always do this wrong. I've done this incorrectly today, but I can learn and get better. Challenge it. Mike is better than me at everything. Mike handed his report in before I did. More specific. It's all too much. I can't handle it. I can't do it all, so I'll do what I can. I'll die if this doesn't work out. I might be disappointed, right? But I'll cope, and there will be other opportunities. So with here, you'll notice that the statements aren't necessarily going from extremely negative to extremely positive. What we're doing is we're taking that extremely negative thought and we're making it neutral. We're giving ourselves more possibility, because maybe the thing is bad. We're not trying to make a bad situation good per se, because maybe it has to be dealt with from the bad perspective. But you just don't want it to be so intensely bad that it becomes worse and you can't deal with it at all. And actually, I'd actually even advocate that positive thinking in itself might be an extreme way as well. You don't want to necessarily move to positive thinking all the time. What you want to do is be in that place of neutrality, that mindful place of neutrality, where you can see things for what they are without attaching yourself to good or bad. And when you do it that way, you just have way more options. You're able to think much more rationally. So challenge any negative thoughts that you have. Do not let them slide by. Catch them, challenge them. So to sum up what we've looked at today is, you first want to be mindful, right? Take a second, pause after you've had a negative thought and say, I've noticed a negative thought, but it is a thought. It is not me. I'm not going to attach myself to it. I'm not going to try and make it good or bad. I'll just observe it for what it is. Just notice it and begin to separate yourself from that thought. Second thing you want to do is change your habitual vocabulary. Change those words that are bad that you use all the time and lower the emotional intensity of those words. And then the words that are good, the positive words that you use all the time, Magnify them. Give yourself the gift of a richer emotional vocabulary. And you're not just giving yourself the gift, you're giving this gift to everyone that's around you as well. So increase the emotional intensity of positive words and decrease the emotional intensity of negative words. And then finally, challenge any negative thoughts that come in your head and see, is this thing really true? Or am I looking at this thing from a black and white perspective? Where are the shades of gray within this? And by doing so, you're diffusing that emotion that's tied to the word, and you're giving yourself more emotional flexibility. So your next steps for this is continue your mindfulness practice of 2 minutes twice a day. You see, I haven't changed that to 5 minutes or 15 or 20 minutes. I just want the habit to be built in for now. So continue practicing mindfulness for just 2 minutes twice a day. If you want to go to 5 minutes, feel free to do so, but just start small. Start small. You don't want this thing to become a chore or, oh, I have to do mindfulness. It's not something that you have to do. It's something that you get to do, right? And it benefits you. So continue your mindfulness practice and challenge yourself to use your new vocabulary, that's both the positive and the negative words, as much as you can over the next 3 days. So catch yourself whenever you say things like good, or okay, or like, and use richer language. Great, fantastic, amazing, passionate, right? Start using more of that and you start to feel it. And this is the thing. You might wake up in the morning, you've had a bad night, didn't sleep well, didn't get much sleep, and there's a ton of things that you have to do that day, and you might not be feeling particularly positive, right? That is the time to use the positive language, not when everything's going great. When everything's going great, it doesn't take much effort to use positive language. It's when things feel like they're going to crap. That's when you want to infuse positivity into your language, right? So notice when on those days that you don't feel that great, use the language, speak that which you wish to become. And that's what you'll feel. That's how the muscle is built. You do things differently to experience things differently. So speak, don't worry about how you feel, speak that which you want to become. If you want to feel happy, you want to feel enlivened, you want to feel more positive, use that type of language and you start to feel it. And notice whenever you're using those warning words and challenge the words, challenge them. Don't let them sit in your mind rent free. I hope that you've had a great week and that you've taken a lot from the session. Sorry if I went a little bit too fast there. I do get very passionate about these topics, but feel free to go over the parts of the video that you want to go over again and write out the exercises, choose your positive words, and have a fantastic, fantastic week. I will see you next week, and I wish you all the best in everything that you do. Bye-bye.